A young girl is found burnt alive in her car. Is this an accident or a more sinister plot? Hi, my name is Sara Jade and welcome to my channel where we talk about true crime, unsolved cases and more. If this is something you're interested in, feel free to subscribe. Now let's get into this week's case. So in today's case we're going to be talking about Jessica Chambers and how she was found in the forest, burnt alive in her own car. Now was this an accident or who'd want to kill this young girl? In December 2014, around 8 p.m, two guys are driving down a rural road in Mississippi called Heron Road. As they go around the corner, they notice there's a fire and decide to go and investigate. As they get closer, they realise it's a car, so they decide to call it in, as they didn't want it to spread around the remaining forest. A few minutes later, the fire brigade turn up. They have a lot of these fires in the area, and cars set alight. They go about just putting the fire out. However, as they go closer, they see a zombie-like figure walking towards them with her arms stretched out. As they get closer, they realise it's a young girl. They go over to her and wrap in a blanket, and she collapses to the floor. Daniel Cole, one of the firefighters, starts to ask her who she is and what her name is. She's finding it very difficult to speak, but finally she says Jessica Chambers. And they're so shocked as they know who she is. She looked completely different. She was burnt all over, her hair was gone, and to this day, they're still scarred by this image. As they're putting out the fire, they realise it's quite intense and there's nothing actually wrong with the car. So they start to get their suspicion that it was set on fire on purpose. So they start to speak to Jessica to see if she can tell them who did it to her. However, she's finding it very hard to walk or talk or do anything as she's burnt all over. Eventually, they manage to get a name out of her, either Eric or Derek. As she's burnt all over, they fly her over to the Region 1 hospital, which is a great hospital for burns victims. They then need to go and inform her parents, so they drive over to her dad's house, Ben, and his wife, Debbie. Once they're notified, they go to her mother's house, Lisa, and they all get in the car together and drive down to the hospital, hoping that she'll survive the night. Jessica was born on February 2nd, 1995, to Ben and Lisa. Her mum was a nurse and her dad was a mechanic for the sheriff department. Although her parents divorced when she was young, they were still very close and they had a close-knit relationship. She lived in a tiny rural community in Cortland, Mississippi, which was about 60 miles south of Memphis, and everyone knew everyone. She had 5 siblings and they all loved her. In high school, Jessica was a cheerleader and liked to play softball, and she knew everyone in Cortland. When her dad was younger, he got arrested for making methamphetamines, but quickly turned his life around and worked as a mechanic for the local police services. In 2012, Jessica's 28-year-old brother died in a car accident, which devastated the family and had a profound effect on her. She started to make bad choices and started to hang around with the wrong people, but she still managed to graduate from South Panola High School in 2013. She starts working before she decides to go to college. She worked at local clothing stores called Goodies. They loved her there and she loved her job. She used to spend most of her wages buying clothes in the shop. She couldn't decide if she was going to be a nurse, teacher or writer, so she was taking some time off before she went to college. On the night of the incident, when Jessica was found, she had over 93% of 3rd and 2nd degree burns all over her body. They believe she was on fire for 3 to 5 minutes, and the doctors told her mum there was nothing they could do for her. And she passed away with her family by her side on the 7th December 2014. They start to investigate the case and they start to search the area surrounding the car. There they found Jessica's mobile and they also found a bit of her bra, and they start to believe that this may be a sexual crime as Jessica was found in just her knickers and bra. So they get the FBI and the Mississippi Bureau of Investigations onto the case. They start by looking at the photos of her body, and as they're looking they see that there's a pattern of a splash mark across her body, and it looked like that she'd been splashed with gasoline before she was set on fire. She was also found partially nude in just her knickers and bra, which pointed towards the sexual assault. However, although they believed that she had been sexually assaulted, no one performed a rape kit on her. Jessica died from smoke inhalation and the burns covering her body, and they focus on the name that she said, Eric or Derek. The keys to her car were found a few days later by a man called Jerry King, who was walking his daughter in her pram. He saw something shiny by the side of the road and went over to investigate. When he looked, he saw one of Ben's body shop tags on the keys, so he decided to hand them in to the police. This also showed that it was intentional, as someone had thrown her keys away after they had left her in the car. So they start to concentrate on all the Erics and Dereks in the area and bring them in for questioning. The police then start to look at her timeline and what she did that day. Her mother recalled that she went out that morning and did a drive around with one of her friends, Keisha. She came home around 2 o'clock and took a nap in the lounger. Around 4:25, she got a call and said to her mum that she was going to a local shop called the M&M Quick Shop, and she would be back and she told her mum that she'd be back quite soon. She rang her mum about 6:48, and she said that she'd be home soon. However, she sounded very weird on the phone and was very quiet and told her mum that she loved her. And that was the last anyone had heard from her until 8 p.m. that night when she was set on fire. The police decided to go to the last shop that she went to, the M&M store, where they spoke to the shop clerk, Ali Asani. He said Jessica was there that night and he'd seen her, and he knew who she was as she was in there all the time. He was very helpful to the police and gave them the video footage of her coming in that night and leaving in her car. However, social media trolls saw that he was from Yemen and started to call him a terrorist and blame him as he had been the last person to speak to Jessica. So the police had to go on live TV and tell everyone that he was very helpful in the case and he had been cleared from the investigation. After then, they go and speak to her best friend Keisha, as she had been with her most of that day. She said they went riding that morning and picked up a young man called Quinton. They had smoked a blunt and then dropped Quinton off at his home, which was just opposite the M&M store. Quinton had just got out of prison for burglary and been let out early, and he'd only known Jessica for the last 2 weeks. Based on this information, they decided to bring Quinton in for questioning. He came in voluntarily and answered all their questions. When asked what he did that day, he gave the same story as Keisha and said they had drove around, smoked a blunt, and they had dropped him off at his house around 11 o'clock, but he never saw him again that day. They asked him if he knew an Eric or a Derek, and he mentions a Derek Holmes, who he believed was acting very strange around Jessica. When they look up Derek, they find that he is a sexual offender and has a record for exploitation of a minor. They then bring him in for questioning. When asking where he was that day, he said that he was at home and didn't leave the house all day, and around the time of the incident, he was rubbing his mum's feet. They thought this was very strange, but then when they went to question his mum, they realised that she had a condition and he'd always helped by rubbing her feet every night. She confirmed that he had been home all night and was no longer a suspect in the case. Believing they would get somewhere with the Erics or Dereks, they looked up 468 Erics or Dereks in the area and brought them all in for questioning. However, the problem was they were all black and everyone thought they were being racially profiled, which caused a rift in the community. However, they all cooperated and it didn't lead them anywhere. Finally, they were able to get some information off her phone. However, they don't find anyone connected to her called Eric or Derek. They do find that she'd been speaking to someone new on her phone, and the messages started to turn sexual. They had been pestering her for sex for about a week, up to the day she died, but she blew them off every time. It was also the same number as the person she called at the M&M stop that night. When they look into this number, they find it actually belongs to Quinton. They find this very suspicious that he never mentioned this when they questioned him. They go to his house to ask him some more questions and find out a bit more details. He then admits that him and Jessica did have sex. It was about a week ago, behind his mum's house, in Jessica's car. They then question him about how he gets around, and he shows them his motorbike that he has in the garage. And when they're there, they find gas cans full of gasoline. Based on this, they question him about what he did that night. And he said that he was in Batesfield that night, about 10 to 20 minutes away from the incident. He said that he'd gone there to buy a prepaid card for his girlfriend so that she could come over and visit him. He had arrived home about 8 p.m. and heard about Jessica, and he deleted her from his phone. This all seemed very strange. However, when they check the footage, they do find him at the store buying the prepaid card around 8:26. This did give him about a 15-minute window, which meant that he could have made it, but very barely. So they start to look into Jessica's boyfriend. His name was Travis Sanford, and he was about 9 years older than her, and he was currently in jail for burglary charges. They had a tumultuous relationship, and he was quite a jealous guy. Some believe that he'd put a hit on her, as he had found out she'd been unfaithful. However, when they go to question him, they rule him out, and he's very upset by her death. They did, however, find that Travis and Jessica had sold around $400 of fake pills to a guy called Roger Lynn Pence. He wasn't very pleased about this, and some people believe maybe he was out for revenge. He'd already threatened Jessica and come to her house and scared her. However, when checking his cell phone records, he was around 35 miles away in Granada. He died around the time of the event, and the police had to let the public know that he was not involved in the case. 6 months later, and they still have no leads. The case looks like it's going to go cold, and they start to look into her cell data. They start to use her cell data to plot where she was that day and at what time. They find that she was in Bateman around 6 p.m, and Quinton was there too, which meant that he had lied about his events that day. She had called him around 5:30 that day at the gas station, and at 6 p.m. they were in Bateman together. Based on this information, they go and track down Quinton to speak to him about these events. They track him down to Louisiana, where he was in jail there based on unrelated charges. When they speak to him, he's very happy to speak to them. They tell him about the cell data, and he admits that he was in Batesman around 6 p.m. with one of his friends. He'd seen Jessica at the Taco Bell and had given her about $10 and a bag of marijuana. But then he said he went back to Cortland with his friend Big Mike to hang out at his friend's house. He then went home and went to the store to buy the card for his girlfriend. They speak to Big Mike to get his side of the story, and he said it's completely untrue, as he was at Tennessee's Titan game that night with his truck. They go and see Quinton again, and he finally breaks down and says he was with her that night. They had gone round to the back of his mum's house to smoke some weed. He said that Jessica left around 7 o'clock after ringing her mum. He then went back inside and denied ever being involved in the case. They then mentioned to him that they can pinpoint his phone with hers around 7:30 and that he was lying. At this, he gets up and goes absolutely nuts. 14 months later, they indict Quinton for her death. However, a lot of the community think that they just pinned it on a black guy, as there was nothing putting him in the car with her that night. His family get him a good lawyer and he's ready to fight the case. They finally go to court and the prosecutors can give their opening statement. The problem they have is that Jessica mentioned Eric or Derek had done this to her, and they had to get across to the jurors not to make up their mind based on Eric or Derek. They go for the emotional statement and ask them to listen to all the information before they make their mind up. However, the defence rely on Jessica's statement and say that she even said that it was an Eric or a Derek, and the cell data that they were using was very unreliable. It was a very emotional and intense case. The defence also talked about Jessica and the life she led before she died. They painted her out as no angel and said that she could have had a lot of people after her for revenge. They also bring in the fireman who goes through the events of what happened when he found her. It was very emotional and everyone in court was crying. However, they find that he did sign a sworn statement that said that Jessica said that it was either Eric or Derek. He said that it could have been a lot of confusion and there was lots of stuff going on that night. However, 5 or 6 other people came forward and said she said the same thing. The prosecutors also talk about how the keys were found, and they were found on the route home from Quinton's house, and they believe that he'd dropped the keys there after he'd set her car on fire on the way home. They then go through the cell data and talk about his cell data and Jessica's. They plot the route from 6:30 to 7:30, and every time Quinton's phone is found with Jessica's. However, there's no activity for both of them for about 40 minutes, around 6:49 to 7:26. They also looked at the surveillance camera of the M&M store, which pointed to Quinton's house. They see that she leaves his house and drives towards the murder scene, and 15 minutes later she's on fire. Around 7:50, they see a figure going into the shed and bringing something out before they leave. They put forward that they believe that he went into the garage, got the gasoline, followed her and set her on fire, then drove to Batesfield to get the guard for his girlfriend and give him an alibi. The prosecutors believe that his motive was that he'd been pestering her for about a week and she had turned him down every time. They believed that he had sexually assaulted her and badly hurt her in an attack, and he believed that he had actually killed her and was going to set her on fire to get rid of the evidence. They also showed that he had texted her around 8 p.m. that night, saying that he couldn't meet up with her as he was going to see his girlfriend, and they believed that this was his alibi text. They also talk about how it was very strange that he never checked up on Jessica after he'd found out that she'd been in an accident and was set on fire, and also deleted all the information straight after he'd found out about what happened to her. When it was time for the jury to give their verdict, it was very strange in the courtroom. The judge asked them for their verdict and said, "This is unanimous, everyone has agreed on this, have they?" And when he says this, someone shouts out, "No, I didn't agree, that's not what I agreed to." This showed that they were not on the same page and it was not unanimous, so he sent them all back into the room to come back with an answer. When they finally come back into the room, they then give the judge their verdict. He reads out that he's not guilty of capital murder. However, again, someone from the jury shouted out, "No, that's not what I said. I said that he was guilty, and it's not a unanimous." This put a lot of strain on everyone in the court, and everyone was confused. He then spoke to the jury and said they'd given one last chance and told them the rules that every single one of them had to agree to the verdict. They go out to deliberate again. They come back 1 hour later and say that they can't come to an agreement, so it's decided it's a mistrial. On the 24th of September 2018, they go ahead with the second trial. They go through all the same information. They also bring in a burns expert that describes how her body would have been like a leather casket around her and she would not have been able to speak or even breathe properly, and what they heard probably wasn't Eric or Derek. They also showed that they'd seen bruises on her body which showed that she had been attacked just before she was set on fire. However, they still can't make a decision, and there were 6 for guilty and 6 for non-guilty, so again it was classed as a mistrial. Based on this information, they allowed Quinton to go down to Louisiana. However, it's not just for holiday or to see family. He was now a suspect for killing another woman. 8 months after Jessica's murder, and before Quinton goes on trial, another lady had been murdered in Monroe, Louisiana. Apartment building manager had smelled a horrible smell for one of his apartments, so he decided to let himself in. When he goes in, he sees that there's been a struggle, and when he goes into the bedroom, he sees a young girl that has been stabbed repeatedly and was in an advanced stage of decomposition. When the police arrive and investigate, they find that it's a young lady called Ming Chang Shaw. She's a 24-year-old exchange student, and they had found her 10 days after her death. She had been stabbed over 30 times on her upper body. While investigating, they also found a receipt from the local pharmacy which came about one day before she died. They decided to go down to the shop and look at the CCTV camera. It shows that she had bought some painkillers and goes outside and gets into someone's car. When she's in the car, she gives these pills to a man that no one can see. They also look at her financial records and see that someone has been drawing out cash out of her account after she died. And when they check the CCTV camera for this, they find that it's the same man that she got in the car with. They check the license plate of this car and it comes back to Quinton. He'd moved to Louisiana to be near his fiancée. As they couldn't get him on murder at this time, they charged him for unauthorised usage of a debit card. One of his friends also came forward at the time of the event and said that he'd been bragging that he'd tortured someone for their PIN number. Although they had this information, they delayed the trial because of Jessica's trial, as if he'd been found guilty of murder, they wouldn't have gone to trial again. So after Jessica's trial, he'd returned to Louisiana to stand trial for Ming's death. Quinton was found guilty of using Ming's card unauthorised and was sentenced to 10 years in prison for being a persistent offender, and he's still awaiting trial of her murder. Based on the results of this case, it will then be determined if he'll go to court again for Jessica's murder. Sadly, Jessica's mum died on the 29th of October 2021 in hospital and will never find out the results of her daughter's trial. Her boyfriend Travis also died at the age of 33 and is killed inside his house, where the suspect fled. Quinton's case has been delayed due to COVID and other legal issues, so it won't be determined if he will go to court for Jessica's death until after this case has been resolved. Once more information is known, I will do an update video to let you know what happened. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
You call me a saint, but you know I'm a stranger, a willing and able.